Well, Paul, the time has finally come. It is November of 2019. Do you know the relevance of that date? Of course you do. It's Blade Runner. We are now living in Blade Runner.
It was very Batman of you. I like that.
It wasn't intended to be. I'm just really tired. And what people don't realize is that we talk for like half an hour to an hour before each episode. So my voice is not very strong and it wears out really quickly. So by the time we actually record anything, my voice is already gone. So I get that Dark Knight kind of, wait, I'm Batman kind of voice. So
You're putting off a real gritty vibe right now. I kind of like it.
This is not about Batman. This is about Blade Runner. And I, like any responsible citizen of society, went out and bought a trench coat and a hovering car. What have you done to celebrate November of 2019?
I went out and got one of them Casio wristwatches with all the little buttons because that was the 80s idea of the future.
Well, good for you. I was hoping you would say that you actually played the Blade Runner game.
Oh, yeah, that too. That's a distant second to my...
Well, that's good, because we needed somebody who was prepared for this episode, because I was too busy buying a trench coat and a hovering car.
That's a very understandable excuse. Second only to dog eating homework. It's a classic. So I'll tell you and everyone about the bloody game.
Which I did play. I actually played this relatively new. I mean, I think there might have been a year or two delay, as with any games I play. I rarely play games as soon as they come out. But yeah, no, I played this a long time ago. It was still the 90s, back in a simpler time. It was a fantastic game, but there's a lot of details I might not still be in possession of, and that's why I'm going to rely on you for a lot of the heavy lifting of like the facts in this episode.
Well, the bad news is I played it about 3 months ago, and I probably remember as much as you do at this point.
This is really making it sound like it's a forgettable game, but it's actually not. It's a great game. It's one of my favorites. It's just it only recently sort of became playable again, since I guess since Windows 98 was no longer.
You know, I remember as a kid, my father was such a tremendous geek that when Windows 98 came out, he flew us to Boston, Massachusetts, because there was a giant computer sort of convention going on. I was kind of young, foggy on the details. I got a lot of free buttons and stickers at the convention, but we actually flew somewhere to obtain Windows 98 is my point. Might have been Windows 95. Actually, it definitely was, but that didn't fit the continuity of the conversation, so I kind of manipulated it to work, and then sold myself out.
It better have been Windows 95. Otherwise, you'd just be like, why didn't you just download it? But I guess Windows 95 makes sense. You didn't really download Windows 95 from the BBSs, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. Audio streams of its cassette. What you said a second ago was that we started off sounding negative about it, and I just got to do my bit real quick and say I fucking love this game, and I think my boldest statement is that it was probably maybe the last great adventure game of the era.
Okay, you know what? I was just about to say, I was really wanting to go into this conversation on this episode about that very thing, because so many people thought that, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, everyone thought that, and I was trying to figure out if it was just me and my friends, and it wasn't just like me and my immediate friends. I know people who I met like years later who were fans and were also like, oh yeah, Blade Runner was like the last great adventure game, and then and so I was going to ask you about that. I was literally going to ask you about that, and you answered it before I could even ask. And you had that same opinion, and a lot of people think about this, and I looked it up, and it's like, it was nowhere near the last great adventure game. There were so many that came out around and even after. Like, I think Grim Fandango was the year after. That was a great game.
Ooh, yeah, that's iconic.
Yeah, Quest for Glory 5 came out. I know people argue as to whether or not that's great, but I think it was pretty great. Yeah. I was looking down the list of chronologically when these games came out, And, sure, it's
King's Quest 8 came out after
came out right after. And I was sort of like, oh, that's why everyone thinks that.
Yeah.
But then it was like, no, here's Grim Fandango, here's Quest for Glory 5, here's, The Longest Journey, here's like every other great point-and-click adventure game that exists. It didn't actually mean anything, even though we all thought it did. And it's so weird. Just, I think a lot of it was just like, it was such a... It was kind of like this big culmination of the point-and-click adventure that's sort of like, I can speak from my own personal experience. This was like the last great adventure game that I played in the contemporary time. Like, everything else that came after it, I played years later. Right. This is like the last one I played, like, oh, it's new. It's like maybe a year or two after I played that. And for me, it was a sort of like, this is it. This is the logical conclusion. This is where adventure games end. Like, this is where the genre dies, because nothing could ever be as good as this again, unless they make another one. And that's all there is to it. I just sort of like, this is it. This is the peak. It's only going to be downhill from here. I was wrong, but that's how I felt at the time.
Yeah, it was a very emotional curtain being drawn in the form of this game. It was so my memory told me it was. I'll say two things. One, really quickly, I'm going to try and bag on King's Quest 8 in every episode going forward until somebody writes and complains, maybe even multiple people. And second of all, to be honest, I've actually never played King's Quest 8, so don't take it too seriously. Or you could take it as that's the highest insult I could give it. Like, I didn't even play you. Yuck. No, I don't know. One day I'll play it. I'm sure it's great. It's Sierra. Anyway, back to the bloody topic. I kind of think my answer as to how this opinion became popular, which I didn't know it was till now, because I thought I was making like a bold statement. So I'm glad to know I'm not alone. But if it is a popular opinion, maybe it has something to do with how fucking amazing this game looks. And I hesitate to say for the time, because I honestly still think it looks really good.
Oh, it does. It looks amazing.
But it's almost like maybe looking back, it kind of looks like the last one. Like, it looks better than Grim Fandango, for example. And let's be real, we could clear pretty much everything off the table. Grim Fandango is one of the most iconic adventure games of all time. And if that came out after this, that does really make you wonder, like, why this one gets called the last great one. And I would just think like the average person's recollection would be like, yeah, that looked too good. It probably came out after Grim Fandango.
Well, I'll tell you something. You are being very consistent with your own self at this moment, because I know you were a big fan of pixel art over 3D, correct?
Yes.
You love pixel art. Did you know that Blade Runner, the game, is not 3D?
No, it didn't.
It actually is not. I looked this up just a little bit before the show. It turns out that this came at such a pivotal time in technology that 3D was obviously coming out, but it wasn't powerful enough to do what they needed to do. So they had to invent their own technology in which to use something called voxels. This technology, as used for the game, was one that they invented in order for the game to happen. And what it is that everything is basically drawn with... it's not 3D graphics, but they are pixels that have 3 dimensions. So each pixel has a width, length, and depth value.
Oh, that's so cool.
So like basically cubes. Everything is kind of... I don't know I don't know if I really fully grasp this, so I could be describing it wrong, but it's basically like, rather than 3D as we know it, it was like 3D pixel art.
Well, that makes sense, because a voxel represents a value on a regular grid in 3-dimensional space, as with pixel... All right, you could tell I'm reading that. I'm sorry. But
well, please read away, because like I said, I have only the most superficial understanding of any of this. I just read that this is a thing that happened like 5 minutes ago. So please, if you have like actual facts to contribute, please let's make this somewhat informative.
Oh, you're going to be disappointed. All right, I'll go ahead. I tapped on the link for the voxel. They don't really, I guess it's not really an engine. The voxel graphics that Westwood Studios used, and it didn't. There's no Wikipedia page for it, so it just pulled up the definition of what an actual voxel is. But it makes sense for what you're describing, because it says a voxel represents a value on a regular grid in 3-dimensional space. So it's I don't.
I am so much more confused now than I was like a second ago.
Well, what's cool about this is that's a very, very short sentence, and it's amazingly confusing and complicated for such a tiny little sentence. It already lost me. It lost me at the. What I'm taking away from it is voxels have something to do with manipulating a three-dimensional object on a flat surface, which is what you're describing, right? Like the pixels are themselves.
Basically.
It's almost like sounds almost kind of like visual trickery, like as opposed to being 3D, it just really looks it.
Yeah.
But then again, what is 3D? What is life? I don't know. What
is 3D that you're looking at on a flat screen, right?
Exactly. That's what I meant. Thank you. You picked up what I put down, mate. Thank you. Exactly. Like it's hard to get too wrapped up in what is 3D when it's all kind of not. Like it just really looks like it, like the hair in a Pixar film. It looks amazing, but it's still bloody flat. But yeah, that's awesome you say that though, because I just don't have a good taste in my mouth for 3D games, because we came up through the worst time for 3D, which is like the caveman period of 3D. Games like Gabriel Knight 3 popped to mind, where it's just yuck. It's just awful. Like I won't go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, point is, no wonder it looks so much better than let's say Grim Fandango. It's got an amazing look, like the way they do like sweeping cameras, and like it doesn't look like Red Dead Redemption 2, but like if you were a modern day independent developer, it would pass. Like it looks good enough to be a 2019 indie game.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot for 97, especially when you look at the other, air quotes 3D games of the time. Yeah. They were all polygons. And
granted, I have only experienced this game through screenshots ever since I played it in the 90s, or possibly 2000, maybe. But so I don't know what it's like blown up to a full screen, like in full interactive motion.
It's amazing. It really, like because I was expecting to not, based on my 3D, kind of bias towards not liking it. I went into this like, all right, I love Blade Runner, so we're going to play this bloody game. There's a point and click adventure game about your favorite film. Like, how have you not played this yet? Get into it, mate. So I forced it. But the reason I was so hesitant and hadn't played it up to that time was because, it was 3D, looking. So when it kicked on, in other words, I was probably the harshest critic it had to impress, and I was blown away. Like it holds up so well, especially since you said just screenshots. Obviously since then, the motion, like the sweeping of the cameras, it actually just looks even more real when it's in motion, or more convincing, whatever.
I must have played this like 98 or 99, because I remember this was perfectly timed for me. That it coincided with a time when I just discovered Blade Runner. So I didn't grow up with Blade Runner all throughout. I was like in my late teens. I was in university. I was starting university when I first came across it. I knew of it. I shouldn't say first came across it, but when I first actually watched it. And I was expecting something very different from what it was. So the first time I was kind of like a little bit on it. But then, over time, it kind of sunk in. So, yeah, you know what? I was kind of expecting something different, but given what it actually was, it was actually really cool. And then I watched it again, and then again and again, and I just became obsessed with it. And I actually, I'll try to make the story quick because it's only kind of tangentially related and only marginally interesting. But there's in one of my university classes, I was assigned to write an essay, and they gave us a list of possible topics. And one of them was to go out and see a theater show and write an essay about that and apply various art theories to the show. And I kind of like, I didn't want to, basically. So I was kind of like, I tried to rules lawyer kind of thing where it's like, well, you know what? How about if I just write it on Blade Runner? Because I just saw Blade Runner, and I'm just going to write about that. And it's postmodern. And I didn't even have to fight, because the teacher was just sort of like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Blade Runner's a good movie. And so I was just allowed to write my essay on Blade Runner, and I got a really good mark on it, even though it was like totally not something that I was supposed to actually do. It wasn't part of the assignment. And in fact, the professor in following years actually readjusted the parameters of the essay so that to include movies and films and stuff like that people can do, because I just decided I was going to do Blade Runner instead of anything that was actually asked.
It was literally a groundbreaking thing that you done. They changed rules about it.
Yeah. So I definitely was obsessed with Blade Runner when the game came out. Like, it was pretty mind blowing that it's like, hey, after all this time later, now they're coming out with the game of Blade Runner. Now that I'm obsessed with it, it's like, it was so awesome. So I was like, in the same way that you say that you were the harshest critic, I would have been the easiest person to be very disappointed with this, because this is like the time when like Blade Runner was just like untouchable. You know, it was like, you know,
the highest
standards, highest expectations. You know me, everyone who's listening to this would know by now that I am like a huge point and click adventure game fan. So a point and click adventure game about one of my favorite movies of all time at the time that it became one of my favorite movies of all time. And it lived up to everything. It was just fantastic. I was like, this is the best game ever. This is awesome.
The rare bloody hat trick. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You get that because you're Canadian, so I used hat trick instead of.
Do Americans not know what hat tricks are? When you pull a rabbit out of a hat and it's like really awesome.
Oh, got him. That was actually more Canadian than anything else, just because you had that on deck. Anyway, but my experience is really similar to yours, except for I didn't complete the trilogy. I discovered the game much later into my obsession with the film. But still, like you said, we both came from a spot where it's like, you know, this. I think I don't know. I almost thought it was maybe too good to be true. Like, I was like, there's no way I'm going to enjoy this. It's amazing when you have high expectations and even those are surpassed. Mm-hmm. That's a rare thing. Like one of your favorite musicians' fifth album is somehow his best. You're like, whoa, like, you know, it's happened. It's a cool moment. You're like, damn, like that's kind of how this game was for me. I'm like, you know, this is, I like it even more. Then
you're not a true fan of the band, man.
They change when they cut their hair, bruh.
Once they signed on to a label and made money. Anyway, sorry, where are we even going with this?
Oh god, I was actually going to continue that, but you're right. I'm focusing on this. I'm not even sure we've actually really started to talk about the game. I'm prepared to go any direction here.
I mean, I will say this, you know, because we say how awesome it was and how it was so groundbreaking. It's weird because it's like, it was groundbreaking in a way that it like had almost no impact moving forward, because like all the things that they did that was really awesome was never done again.
Yes, that's such a great point. Yeah, that's such a great point. They're like, well, those were great ideas. See you later. Yeah.
Like, I think that's probably why this was kind of like regarded for a little while. You know, history looks back and laughs on it, but that's probably why people thought this is like the last great adventure game, because it's like this is like the culmination, the accumulation of everything piled on. This like did everything that was groundbreaking and like built on everything before it, and they're like, yeah, we're just going to sidestep that and just tiptoe around that and pretend that never happened.
They're like, you're right. They totally, they really kind of shat on the whole thing, because they did such a. They're like, look, you like pixel art? We got it. You like 3D? We got that too, baby. Like they gave us the world. They gave us as far as groundbreaking too. They gave us mechanics that I've not seen again. That were just awesome. God, I know there was a really complicated way to put this that I'll try and diverge from, but the idea that the non-playable characters, that their roles and interactions each time you play the game would be different, and how, you know, there'd be, you know, 4 different endings, but times that 4 by another 4, because for every 4 endings there's 4 different ways the non-playable characters could have affected that ending. Well, it was like a matrix of endings in this game, and they all made sense.
What it was is you know, this is part of the brief amount of research I did just before the show. But it was apparently what they did was the NPCs are AI simulated. So they basically just like, I think you verified this with me because you played it more recently. I think it was basically there's a part where the NPCs are randomly assigned certain characteristics that they'll carry throughout the game. And based on that, they're kind of let loose with their own AI and said, okay, go about your agendas. And they do. Right. And, well, this is sounding kind of scary, similar to actually, like, making replicants when you think about it. Because they just created this AI to say, like, okay, here's your goal, do it. And they just unleash these NPCs into the world to go about their thing. And they'll... and apparently they have goals that they're trying to accomplish throughout the game. And based on your actions and based on their objectives, you'll eventually come across one of like 12 different alternate endings.
Yeah. My mind's still blown from what you said a second ago. That there's replicants placed within a game about replicants. That's amazing. Because the more you think about it, the more true it becomes. No, but that was a really cool statement. Like that could have been their whole marketing campaign. There's bloody replicants inside a game about replicants. Because that's exactly it. They're given a mild description of a task and given a simulated life as a human, and they do their thing.
And like,
but the way it affects the game is fun.
Don't be wrong. Like NPCs have AI these days. It's just like every character in a Grand Theft Auto game is like pretty independently in motion and stuff like that. But these are like major characters. These are like the characters that are driving the plot forward and just like driven by their AI.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, it's
in
not
real time.
Like
that was their whole thing. They were the real time adventure game because this stuff was unfolding while you were doing something. Nothing was waiting for you in order to happen.
Yeah, and as you know, I just learned what real time meant about 5 minutes ago. I always just heard it as something people added to a stat about a video game and accepted it. I'm like, cool, that sounds neat. And then it was very simply explained to me, and I was like, wow, it's not just a clever name, and I get it now. I'm glad I never said anything about this out loud until on a podcast for 100 more people to listen to than usually listen to me. But anyway, the fact that, like you said, it's not like an AI in Grand Theft or whatever, of like, that weird thing you see on YouTube where it's like for some reason the AI is like beating his dog or something, like just the weird AI stuff they do. It, like you said, like they actually like impact the game, and to take it even another step further is that in part impacts the ending, which it's really cool. And what I love about this game is I'm excited for it to be a couple more months away so I can play it again. Like I know I need a little more time than 3 months, but I'm like still like well excited to play it again because it's not just about like you get to the end of the game and the game plays you one of its 12 endings. You know what I mean? It's not that at all. It's not cheap. It's like the fact that these AIs change each gameplay is like, now your partner, maybe she's a replicant. The next time she could just be a normal person, or the next time she could be a normal person who's a sympathizer. Yeah.
No, and I get that. And and that's kind of the thing too, because it's like the first time I played this, because I didn't realize that there were 12 endings. I always thought there were 4 because when I did play it, I finished it on my own, and then I read about there are alternate endings. And the guide that I was reading said, here are the ways to trigger the 4 different alternate endings. So, I went back, played it, got all the endings, and I was like, okay, well, I think I'm pretty satisfied with that. I've finished this game. As it turns out, as we just found out, like, I never knew this after all these, like, 20 years or something like that. I never realized, but that's 4 alternate endings per, like, path of, like, 3 different paths that are randomly selected for you.
Exactly, and 3 times 4 is bloody 12. It really is a thing. It's like a formula. Exactly. There's the 4 different endings, and then depending on the 3 different ways an NPC can be in the game, will change those 4. So yeah, you get 12. It really is like a matrix. I don't know what that word means. It sounds like you'd use it now. But it's a bunch of
stuff that could possibly happen.
Yeah, followed by whoa. My first playthrough, I found out about the endings same as you, where I was like, all right, word on the street, all the bloody kids are talking about the 1997 Westwood Studios game Blade Runner. Word on the street is there's more than the one ending, and I was really unsatisfied with my initial ending. I mean, I liked it. I was just disappointed because spoilers, because there's a opportunity that I didn't catch in time to save your partner from dying right before the end, and like it's just about to be the end. So I saw the ending through, and I liked it a lot. But then I was like, well, that was kind of a bummer. Like we've been through a lot, me and her. So I went back and was able to save her and get the other ending, and heavy spoilers. And then I learned that so the villain in this game, who is awesome,
He's totally not Roy Batty, is he?
He's a good villain. Everything about his character is amazing. He just has the most forgettable name I've ever heard, because we spoke pre-recording about this. I wasn't familiar with it, and having been reminded of it about 20 minutes ago, I've forgotten it again. And what is it? Cozy?
Clovis.
Clovis. There we go. Clovis. So at the end of the game, again, heavy spoilers, Clovis gives like the most self-indulgent dying speech ever, that it's almost humorous halfway through. We're like, oh my God, he's still going. Like, that's like a bit on SNL. Like he just keeps bloody going. But it's like really dramatic. It's like pretty decent little verbal poetry, and it's the end of the game, so like you wouldn't dare do anything to interrupt the final speech of the villain, surely. So you finish the game, and then you hop online and you read some comment in Reddit that's like, hey, you could just shoot him when he's talking.
That's what I did. Like, that's my first impulse. That's the first thing I did.
It was your first?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, I actually, it's one of those things where like he talks, and after about like the second minute of talking, I'm like, he's not going to shut up. So I shot him. And it wasn't until, as like the mirror image of like what you did, I actually had to read and find out that if you let him talk, he will just die naturally because you let him die. And I had to look it up to realize that he will actually, that can happen. I thought he was just going to be like, well, no, you're supposed to kill him anytime now, guys.
See, we bring our listeners some bloody balance on this show.
Interesting thing, and I'll get back to that character in just a second, but I just wanted to bring up, because I know this is something I'm going to totally forget if I don't right now. Things happen in real time, so characters move about on their own accord. I went through my entire playthrough without realizing that there's like 5 characters from the actual movie who have cameos played by the actual actors that played them in the movie. And they're not hugely important. I don't recall. Maybe 1 or 2 of them are people that I might have just forgotten that I ran into, but apparently there's like 5 actors that they brought back to play their characters again, that are just randomly walking around that you can eventually encounter
that's really
if you
cool.
play it right. Yeah. But going back to this villain guy, who is totally not Roy Batty, but he is like just most obvious attempt to try to recreate Roy Batty. He's like, the poetic, flowery, poetry spewing guy is kind of like his defining characteristic. He's basically everything that Roy Batty is, but just, they couldn't actually use Roy Batty because this is taking place at the same time as the movie. So that was actually one of the notes that they had, was that they cannot do anything that screws with the continuity of the film. And it was funny because I sort of thought about it to myself. It's like, so what if this is just like a model of Replicant at the time? Like you had the laborers, you had the pleasure models, and then you have like these poetry spewing replicants for some reason, and that's just like one of the models that they just sent out there, I guess, just to wax poetic about everything. It's like, well, how did you not expect that those things are going to eventually become sentient and rebel, right?
They're a bit bloody melodramatic, mate. Have you not noticed? I mean, all your replicants are oddly romantic. It's a strange programming choice. It's funny too, because when you were describing Clovis, there it is, a bloody name. You were like, Roy Batty, something poetry, and like that's the only word you need is poetry. Like that explains Roy Batty. Yeah, it's just this Shakespearean, those self-indulgent scenes, which are awesome in the film. But yeah, I don't even know. in the game, I won't say that they weren't welcome or anything. 'Cause I don't think you really deal with Clovis much. It's just that bloody, the ending, which was awesome.
I honestly, I can't even say I really remember very much about the story. As with a lot of point-and-click adventure games, the first time I go through it, I'm kind of more just trying to like solve the puzzles and get the ending rather than actually paying attention to the plot. So, forgive me if I don't really remember everything. I do remember, just like, something about a little girl and then your partner who, I don't know, there's some sort of a sexual tension there or something, maybe or maybe not. I don't remember. And
what if you found out right now that was only literally you that found there was sexual tension between? I'm just kidding. See, the thing about this game that's really, or I guess I should say, the thing about this point that you're making really speaks volumes for the game's quality, because it's not one of those games where it's like, here's the bad guy, he's doing this, you have to stop it, this happens, the end. It's like there's a lot going on where it's not kind of brushing on what we said about Space Quest, what you said about it brilliantly, that it was more of a scene-to-scene thing. I won't say that this game is to that degree, but there's so many different things with so many different characters going on that it's hard to be like, Ghost Pirate LeChuck is back, now he's a zombie, he's going to try and kill you, you got to stop him. It's kind of more complex than that, to the point where, your boss later ends up turning to the bloody dark side, and there's a kind of a lot to process there, which kind of back to what I said about Clovis, how he's not actually in the game that much. He's more in the game as like, the overarching, the guy you hear about, because the game's filled with like just so many henchmen and moving characters and, Deckard in the background. By the way, you had said a few moments ago about some of the actors in the film voicing it. Did you know that they reached out to Harrison Ford to be a voice in this game?
I did not know that. No, I take it he said no.
He probably no. He actually didn't respond. He just walked away in classic grumpy Harrison Ford style.
Well, I think he didn't like working on Blade Runner, did he?
I don't think he liked working on anything.
That's kind of true.
Right? I mean, I love him to death, don't get me wrong.
How does he even get work?
And I love that he's grumpy. It makes him more adorable.
Yeah. I get why he's offered roles, but how does he get work if he just seems to hate everything he does? Like, how is he still an actor?
Yeah, I definitely heard him trash, but Star Wars as well.
Oh yeah,
wanting to be killed off in this. I don't think I've heard him talk down on Indy, and he did go back for that. So maybe that's his favorite. Mm-hmm. But anyway, enough about Harrison.
One of my and I think this is a part which I think you've been wanting to talk about for a long time. One of my favorite parts about any movie ever in general is the soundtrack of Blade Runner, and just that the Blade Runner Blues is just a fantastic track. I can't even begin to describe how amazing that track is. And especially what it kind of like how it impacted me at the time that I was really big into this. And it was so cool to reach a scene where you kind of like, you get back into your apartment, you walk out into your balcony and overlook the city, and then that music comes on, and it's like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's in here.
Yes.
And it's just, it's such a cool moment where you're kind of like looking over the city and the Blade Runner Blues plays. And it's like, yeah. That's great. And then I found out like 5 minutes before we started recording that that's actually not the same track that was used in the movie. And, I talked about this with you, but, for the benefit of the audience, what happened was they didn't get the rights to the soundtrack. So they got their in-house designer to recreate that song and create a few more songs based on the style. But basically that song, which could have fooled me, I thought it was the exact same one. He basically had to recreate that by ear because he wasn't really allowed any access to the source material other than just to like listen to the CD. Yeah,
it's really strange. I didn't notice it being different either. Maybe some of that was the gameplay, but God, I must have listened to the Blade Runner soundtrack a million times. I definitely probably should have noticed. but I didn't. And that whole story is about the soundtrack thing. It's really strange. Like, like they were, he was allowed to replicate and reproduce the music, but he couldn't have the source. Like that's just there's some strange legalities going on there, I'd imagine. But I'm glad that you mentioned that scene and that it stood out to you, because I wasn't sure if I was just mental over the soundtrack and the whole lore and world of it, and that stood out for me for personal reasons or whatever. So hearing you say without prompt that was something that kind of stuck with you was really cool, because that definitely was like a perfect scene. The perfect storm. They saved the right sound clip for the right scenery and vibe in the game, like you said. On the balcony in the rain, the neon. It was epic.
Well, I think, and you've mentioned before in our conversations, so I can't remember if you've mentioned ever on the show that you said that the when it comes to Blade Runner, the movie, the music really is one of the characters.
Yes,
and which is a really great point, because it totally is. The other thing which I just sort of realized now, it's sort of like, especially if you watch the director's cut and later, so you just kind of ignore that horrible voiceover track that came out with the theatrical release. It is just about the like the mood and the atmosphere, and it really, how much you enjoy the movie is really going to hinge upon how much you enjoy the soundtrack, because equivalent to Ennio Morricone and his scores, it's like if you take them out, you don't really have much left. Right. And so this movie is a great movie and all, but a lot of that is because of the music. So there's a lot of like these slow scenes where not much happens except a character walks from here to there, or Deckard looking out the window at the city as he's being driven somewhere. And you realize how much of the emotional weight is being carried by the music entirely. Right.
Yeah.
So without that, you don't really get anything. So I think that's kind of, I think that's why, if you're a big fan of the movie, you kind of have to part and parcel be a big fan of the soundtrack. And I think when you actually get to that scene where they bring back the iconic, probably the most iconic theme from the movie, and especially the way they use it, it's like, if you're a fan of the movie and you're playing this game, that's not going to not be the big moment of the game, right?
Right. It's so true. The way you worded it, it's almost like one of your favorite actors steps out on screen to make a cameo, and you're like, oh my god, it's fucking him! Like, can you believe it? It's the music carries so much weight as far as being a character in the film. Let's say that when it suddenly appears in the middle of this game, you remember it like an old friend. It's like, or seeing, a favorite star walk out into the film for a cameo you didn't hear spoilers for. It's like, oh my god, like, because you're right. In the film itself, like the music is, it's always there to both like set the mood and nudge you into different moods, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Kind of influence you just ever so slightly. But I find that people that don't particularly like the film, and they are wrong, factually, let me rephrase this more universally. I think myself, you described so earlier, I think a lot of people enjoy this film tenfold the second time. And there's something to be said about this movie kind of requires you to let go. You got to kind of let go and let the atmosphere kind of do its thing, do its job, to the point where I'd actually probably say the movie like really genuinely relaxes me. And I'm not sure if I'd describe any other movie as relaxing.
Yeah. Because I think you go into this movie and typically, at least in my experience, one typically goes into it expecting a sci-fi action thriller, and it's not. Right?
Yes, same here. Yeah.
And it's not that. It's a sci-fi film noir, and absolutely not. I was expecting some like techno action pew pew thing, and it's like, no, it's just like this. It's a noir detective movie set in the future. Exactly.
Yeah, and noir is such an important word. Like I think it's it's like the embodiment of a modern to its time noir film. You know, if you kind of think about the way the role that music played in noir, you know, from its origin, I don't know, 20s maybe, you know, there was a lot of, you know, dramatic pauses and, you know, a horn blasting in the background as cigarette smoke, you know, went up into the, it really is almost like, you know, they took away a trumpet and put in a synthesizer and so forth. A really, really modern noir film, which probably isn't news to most people listening, but the game does an awesome job, I think, of maintaining that mood, but it takes it up just one very necessary notch.
Yeah.
You know, for interactive fiction, like, you know, it's got to be, you know, you got to have something to do, in other words, when you play a game, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to probably describe a gameplay as relaxing. Asterisk mark, there's time and place. Not an adventure game, let's say, because then you might just get, like, tired or sleepy. So the game keeps, in other words, it keeps a good pacing throughout, but it still has that kind of laid back, you know, chill vibe about it, and they took awesome care into the scenery, the screens that you get to explore. And they replicated a few from the film, I believe, not all of them, I don't think, but a few kind of iconic shots from the movie pop up in the game.
I was actually, that blew my mind when I saw some of the locations from the movie. I was like, how did they do that? Like, seriously, how did they do that? Like, did they recreate? Like, I just can't even think about, like, the amount of work and attention to detail that went into creating these things so precisely. It's like, this is the scene from the movie. Like, this is exactly that location.
Yeah, no, it really, you're right, because that feeling of this is that scene was way stronger in this game than I think it's ever hit me before. Like, I think it was the most I've ever felt inside of a familiar world.
Yeah.
You know, I can't think of anything offhand to really compare it to, but, you know, there's experiences, maybe licensed games or whatever, where you're like, okay, you know, I know Alien really well, so, you know, again, I shouldn't say.
Actually, no, you're right. You're actually very right, because I played Alien Isolation earlier this year, and you do visit this one spot. This is a very iconic scene from the original movie, and Alien is like one of my favorite movies of all time. I even rank Alien just slightly higher than Blade Runner. And when I reached that scene in that game, I was like, "Oh yeah, cool." But then but then in Blade Runner, it was sort of like, "Oh my god, they created that like perfectly." I guess it's also because like I just didn't expect it at the time. Now it's like, well, of course they did. You know, I'd be disappointed if they didn't, but like, because anyone can. Or I don't go say it's not hard work, but you know, the technology's there and we're used to it. We've seen it time and time again. But in Blade Runner, I've never seen that. It's like, or if you do, you'll see like a nice little pixel portrait of it. But to see it created like so realistically, like it was actually there on the set of the movie. Yeah, exactly.
And you know, having played it more in the modern age, again, while the graphics blew me away, you know, you could definitely argue it's not, you know, the best. It's you know, it's not the current Rockstar game or whatever. But another aspect on top of how well it was done and how great it looked, and despite its age, it had that cool feeling of like when you see a scene in a film and you almost wish you could just grab the camera and move it left and right and just look around it and look around the building, or it gave me that feeling of like, well, I know this scene really well. And now I know what's behind that building, and that sounds ridiculous, but it was actually really exciting. I'm like, it made for really good immersion, because I'm like, I really feel like I'm in this world right now. Like this is amazing.
Absolutely. I just want to point out one little thing, just because I want to mention it before, because it's relatively irrelevant. But you mentioned before about how the music, it expresses a mood and kind of like pushes you towards the emotional journey that it wants you to be on in the movie.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to note, because only just when you mentioned that, it kind of occurred to me that in the actual book that it's based on, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, one of the little things from the book that was not carried over into the movie adaptation was that they use these things. I forget what they're exactly called. But they're basically mood boxes. I'm not sure if they're actually called that or not. I'm just going to refer to them as that from now on. But yeah, they're basically these mood boxes that you set them to the mood that you want to feel, and then they make you feel that way. So it's kind of funny that you mentioned like it's kind of funny that you mentioned that that's basically what the music is doing. Is it's kind of like pushing you towards experiencing a mood, and it's sort of like someone is laughing at us right now.
Yeah, that's really it makes you even wonder like if Vangelis like really read into that.
Yeah.
I highly doubt it went down that way, but there is something to be said that the book's version of a soundtrack was those boxes.
Yeah. So it's like the music is a mood box, and the game is full of replicants. So we're just being played for fools left and right. But yeah, so I mean, like, I talked a lot about my personal context and experience, but like, what was it like for you the first time you played it? Because I forget, you might have mentioned earlier before, was Blade Runner like one of your favorite movies by the time that you played the game?
Oh yes, yeah. Because my first playthrough was just 3 months ago. I hadn't played it like when it came out or in the past.
Wait, ever?
You know what,
you mean like the 3 months ago was like the first time you ever played it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I thought you played it before.
I watched one of my mates play a little bit of it way back in the day, but even then it was maybe for like an hour tops, and I didn't actually get to play, and it was so bloody long ago that I was seeing it again for the first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had never actually myself played it, so yeah, I was already massive Blade Runner fan of both films, to the point now where I can't even give like top 3 or top 5. I never could when it comes to personal favorite anything because I'm indecisive. But like I can't even decide with those, so I'm just like all the Blade Runners, like they're tied. They're one thing. Like see them both. They're amazing. But yeah, the game. I just can't express enough how blown away I was by the graphics, because again I did not want to play this game, basically. I was like, you have to because this is your favorite movie and an adventure game. But those kind of graphics, see, like, to me, pixel art aged really well. And people like Watch Eye, etc., all the lovely people out there, Julia, making these games, it doesn't really feel like it's an old, outdated thing as retro as it is. Whereas, like, 3D, I mean, it just aged like shit. So, like, the sentence is going to sound weird because I love classic games, but when I looked at Blade Runner, I was like, this game's gonna feel and look old. and again, I know it's weird because I love old games, but to me they're not like spiritually old. They just happen to have came out a while ago. Yeah. all these classic games that I love, I don't see them as like trying to muscle through a black and white film. Whereas I do see 3D games like that where I'm like, I don't want to go back to like that 90s PlayStation 2 polygon bullshit. Yeah. Well, so it
definitely benefited from not being graphics similar to Alone in the Dark.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's
which I love.
That's proof.
And it was great. But I'm just saying,
it's a little hard on the eyes nowadays. Yeah. I think it always was. But yeah. So I was blown away by the graphics, and I will say they did an awesome job into playing into their strengths as far as the Blade Runner universe, the world, whatever, because it's so dark and so a lot of it is the night sky, a neon glow, and maybe some rain. So to cut some of the other games some slack that were done around this time that I think were in superior looking, it's like they played really well to their strengths. So I felt like the game aged really well because it's hard there's not a lot of little detail to get wrong with old 3D. It's just, instead of like tons of, bad 3D detail of even a wall or whatever, it's just black for the night sky and some glowing neon. So it's, you know what I mean? Like they played into their strengths, which helped to age. The only thing that didn't really age well graphically, I think, was the cutscenes, because the people look weird. And honestly, they still do. I don't know if you've seen like screenshots from the PS4's Spider-Man game. Like he looks so strange. The teeth are so. Stop doing
generally
teeth.
Like just cutscenes generally.
Yeah. Like nowadays, like even 3D cuts. I mean, Red Dead 2 was pretty awesome, but back to Spider-Man, it was ridiculous. The teeth are so strange. Anyone listening right now who's played that is probably like, yeah, the teeth did look really weird.
I don't know. My mind kind of contextualizes a lot of this stuff. I just recently played like Rule of Rose, and the cutscenes just look phenomenal to me. Even still.
Yeah, that is a good point too. You catch me out on that kind of a lot because it always makes me think the same thing. Like after a few minutes, it doesn't, it's not like it's bothering me the entire experience. It goes away really quickly and becomes life now.
I mean, like even just the gameplay is okay. I'm used to it, and I acclimatized to that really well. And I think it's like perfectly fine. And it's actually really good. Probably one of the better looking PS2 games I can think of. But the cutscenes, even like I'm blown away by them. I'm sort of like, oh, that looks really good. This is PS2.
Right. Yeah, and see, when we hang up the telly, when we're done, I'm gonna have to check out some screenshots there and kind of compare. I wonder if they're probably pretty similar style. Because I mean, and again too, I should say in the Blade Runner game, the cutaways are definitely above average for its time. But I just think the gameplay and there's like animations, like when you arrive at a scene, there's like a sweeping camera, and it's very cinematic, and that all just looks so mint. So when they do a cutaway to just a straight 3D thing, it's just like, oh yeah, this is a game, but but it looks bloody amazing. So that being said, and speaking of how we just kind of you just adjust to things and carry on and not think about it. I also did that with this game. So as much as I'm saying the music was mint, as much as I can't stop talking about the graphics, even though I actually want to stop and can't. Jesus. It's I quickly pretty much forgot about, all that stuff. Playing a game isn't like just like, oh, this atmosphere. Like that's, it'd be 20 hours of that. I don't know, 10, whatever. But my point is that putting all that stuff aside, the story is still the best part about the game, probably.
Right.
Yeah. The story was really well done. Like it didn't feel like a movie. It felt like a Netflix binge. Like it's more. I feel like it's more complicated than the what would go down in the space of a movie. It felt like a solid 10 episode sort of situation.
I would say, and this is like kind of, I guess, my final thought, just because we're coming towards the end of this episode. I would say, as kind of like my final thought, this is one of those rare times, and I guess I have to go back and try it again just to make sure that this still holds up. But I'm pretty sure you're going to verify this for me. Considering a lot of the things that happen in the movie that you get to experience in the game, so you get to do a voice contest, you get to do the image enhancement for detective work and stuff like that. Normally when I come across stuff like that in a game adaptation, it feels so ham-fisted and kind of shoehorned in. I was so stoked to do those in this game. It's like, man, that's awesome. I'm doing that thing,
Yeah. That was probably gonna be my closing point too. Was how much I actually love the puzzles. Like they were so much fun. Like you said, doing the where you scan a photo. Mm-hmm. That was genius, because it was so much bloody actual fun to do. Like it was just a good time. Like I remember playing that game and being like, this is the first time in a while. Usually a game with good puzzles for me is a game where I can just get through them.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd quite experienced enjoying them before until this game, where I was like, wow, actually doing them is also fun. This is how refreshing. But yeah, doing the Voight-Com thing was so much fun in the game, and it's one of the sort of few, not really few times in the game that they give you kind of a lot of control and power over the plot. So you can decide whether or not to give them one, and then you can decide what to do with the test results. Like it feels proper.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if any of you have any thoughts on Blade Runner, the game, the movie, or anything Blade Runner related, or if you just don't like the sound of my voice or the look of my face, leave us a comment or send us an email. We are at mail@classicgamersguild.com. We are also a Facebook group and a Facebook page. We have a Patreon, and we are on Twitter at the CG Guild and Instagram at CGG Podcast. So come find us, come interact with us, drop by, say hello, say if you like or dislike our show, or if you have issues with us personally.
I'm going to leave a comment on one of our own threads about your face.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, buddy, do all the things he just said. For God's sakes. Thanks for listening, don't do a murder. I shouldn't have said thanks for listening. That was weird. It's a weird, oddly formal thing to say.
Are you done?
Yeah, I am done.